Imagine a pot of water on the stove. The heat is low, barely noticeable. You place a frog inside. It doesn't jump out. The water warms slowly, comfortably. The frog adjusts. By the time it realizes the danger, it's too late. This isn't just a fable. It's a warning. Across history, many societies haven't fallen through war or revolution, but through something quieter, slower, more seductive. A gentle shift, a few words erased, a rule tightened, a song forgotten. And before anyone notices, the world they once knew is gone. This is the story of Lauren, a fictional town that mirrors too many real ones. A town that didn't fall all at once, but drifted quietly into the dark. And the most haunting part, no one saw the moment it began. No great tragedy begins with thunder. It begins with comfort. It started like most things do, not with a scream, but with a whisper. The village of Lauren sat in a shallow valley between gentle hills where wheat fields swayed like golden oceans. Children played in the dust, and elders watched the sun like it owed them answers. There was peace, not perfect peace, but familiar peace. In Lauren, people did not talk much about politics or philosophy. They talked about weather and livestock and bread prices. Their world was small, but it felt enough. And that, perhaps, was the first vulnerability. A new voice. One evening, as the village gathered for the weekly market, a man with a clean coat and clever eyes stood by the fountain. He wasn't from Lauren. His voice was crisp, confident, like someone used to being listened to. He spoke of troubles in the capital, of outsiders bringing crime, of threats to tradition, of values being diluted, morality being lost. People paused, not because they agreed, yet, but because he made them feel something new, unease. "Don't you feel it?" he said. "Things slipping away. You may not see it here, but it's coming. You deserve better, safer streets, stronger families, a voice that listens to you." He didn't ask for money. He didn't demand loyalty. He just planted a seed. And then he left. The comfort of agreement. A week passed, then two. Then more strangers arrived, young, well-dressed, handing out papers with headlines like, "The cost of compassion, how we let danger in. Is tolerance weakness disguised as virtue? The forgotten heartland, voices the city ignores." The villagers didn't read much before, but these words felt close. They sounded like something true, not because they were, but because they felt like a shape they already knew in the dark. And then something peculiar happened. People began to nod more often, less questioning, more agreeing, because agreeing felt easier, and easier in uncertain times feels like safety. The baker martyr began closing earlier on Tuesdays. She said there had been strange people from the next town talking in accents she didn't trust. She didn't say why they made her nervous. She just said, "It's better to be cautious these days." Nobody disagreed. The librarian removed a few books from the shelves. One she heard might be too complicated for children. One mother said thank you. The local preacher gave a sermon on the danger of imported ideas. He said the truth was already here in Lauren. It always had been. People stood and applauded. Not because they were forced, but because it felt righteous. You see, when water boils, it doesn't happen suddenly. First it warms, then it simmers, then it whispers in bubbles. The people of Lauren didn't notice the temperature rising. They thought they were still just being careful, still good, still moral. They didn't burn any books. They just removed a few. They didn't jail dissenters. They just stopped inviting them to speak. They didn't outlaw kindness. They just redefined it. Nobody marched through the streets with torches. Not yet. But fear had entered the bloodstream. And fear, once it gets comfortable, rarely leaves without a cost. Weeks later, the clean-coated man returned. This time, people remembered him. He spoke again, but now the tone had shifted. Less gentle, more urgent. There are those who want to erase you, he said. Not with guns, with ideas, with influence, with laws that pretend to be fair but destroy what you love. People listened, not because he had proof, but because he said what they already feared. He wasn't just a visitor now. He was a voice they trusted, a name they whispered, a face they believed. His followers set up an office by the old granary. They called it the Center for Renewal. It sounded nice, warm, harmless. Like a pot of water, still, just a little too warm to notice. You don't need a sword to change a people. Just change the meaning of their words. It was strange how quickly the people of Lauren began speaking differently, not because they were told to, but because it felt natural, even virtuous. It started with small words, harmless words, words that once meant one thing and now meant something else entirely. At the Center for Renewal, leaflets began circulating with a new kind of language. Traditional values, cultural purity, moral clarity, protecting our own. They didn't sound cruel. In fact, they sounded kind, protective, like a warm blanket on a cold night. But when someone asked, protect from whom? No one answered directly. Instead, they'd say, you know, or those who don't share our way. The undefined them hung in the air like a fog, blurry, nameless, and dangerous. In the old days, kindness in Lauren meant helping strangers. Now it meant helping the right people. Tolerance once meant accepting differences. Now it meant being weak. Freedom used to mean speaking your mind. Now it meant knowing when to stay silent for the greater good. Marta the baker stopped serving two travelers because they wore unfamiliar robes. She didn't say she hated them. She said, I just want to preserve our culture. The others nodded. No law had changed, no violence had occurred, but something deeper had shifted, not the rules, the definitions. Soon, people who spoke differently were called confused. Those who questioned the center were labeled ungrateful. And those who remained silent were praised as loyal. It was clever. Instead of silencing dissent, they made it sound shameful. Instead of forbidding opposition, they rebranded it as betrayal. Even children began repeating phrases they barely understood. Real citizens follow the center. Too much freedom creates disorder. Some questions are dangerous. Miss Elia had taught history in Lauren for 20 years. She was calm, thoughtful, and never political. But when she corrected a misquote from a center pamphlet, pointing out that an ancient law had been misrepresented, parents complained. She's undermining confidence, one father said. She's making my son feel ashamed for being proud, another added. No one shouted. No one arrested her. They simply replaced her with a younger teacher, someone aligned with the new vision. Elia moved away in silence. The most frightening part, no one missed her. Because by then, the town was speaking a shared tongue. A language born not from logic, but from fear and reassurance, braided together. The clean-coated man came again, now wearing a badge. He gave speeches in the square, this time under a banner. One voice, one future. No one protested. Why would they? The words sounded beautiful. Even if no one quite knew what they meant anymore. At Sunday service, the preacher introduced a new verse into his sermon. We thank the center for helping us remember who we are. It wasn't in scripture, but no one noticed, or if they did, they said nothing. Because everyone was tired. Tired of worrying, tired of asking, tired of feeling like something was slipping away. And the center, with its soft words and strong hand, gave them something they hadn't felt in years. A sense of order, even if that order came with silence. You don't need to exile people to remove them, just make them invisible. Lauren had always been a quiet town, but now it was too quiet, like a house after someone moves out and no one dares speak of them. No official decree had ever been made, no ban, no law. And yet the people who were not quite like us had stopped showing up. There was old Haran, who sold spices at the edge of the market, his stall gone. Mina and her daughter, who wore headscarves and never missed a festival, absent. And the family near the river, with strange music playing from their window, moved away. No one had forced them out. But when they walked through town, they had stopped receiving smiles, then greetings, then service. Marta the baker said it simply. They don't fit the mood anymore. The mood. That word, mood, had become code. It meant too foreign, too liberal, too outspoken, too unwilling to recite the phrases everyone else now said with ease. The Center for Renewal had never once told anyone to be cruel. Instead, they encouraged cultural alignment. Their flyers used phrases like, shared identity builds trust. Unity begins with familiarity. Differences are the first seeds of division. People began choosing neighbors like they chose furniture, comfortable, quiet, and familiar. There was a boy in Lauren named Timo. His parents had moved from the borderlands years ago. Timo spoke like any other boy, played the same games, and laughed the same way. But one day, a teacher paused during roll call. That name, she said, isn't very local. Timo didn't understand. By the next week, he'd been moved to a back row. No more invitations to birthday parties. One parent whispered to another that he looked like one of them. His parents pulled him from school within the month. They left town shortly after. People began doing safety checks at night, not official patrols, just looking, watching, making sure there were no strange gatherings. A woman was questioned for keeping letters from a cousin in another province. She wasn't arrested, just warned. Another man was told his bookshelves might be seen as ideologically inconsistent. No one came with handcuffs. They came with suggestions. You might want to reconsider that decor. People talk, you know. Why take the risk of being misunderstood? It was easier to comply, easier to stay invisible. Soon the gaps left behind were filled, not with new faces, but with echoes. The music changed, the food changed, the art changed. Everything became more appropriate, local, approved. No signs needed to be posted. The town had internalized its own border. It was as if Lauren had shrunk, not in size, but in spirit. From a village of stories, accents, and color, to a village of sameness, of suspicion, of silence. The town's tailor, an old man named Bram, once whispered to a friend, I remember when Mina brought me foreign cloth. It shimmered. I didn't know what to do with it, but I miss it. The friend didn't respond. By the next week, Bram had closed his shop for personal reasons. No one asked why. When a society begins to worship purity, it does not clean itself, it devours itself. The people of Lauren no longer whispered. They stood tall when they spoke of virtue, of loyalty, of values. The transformation was nearly complete, but not quiet, not anymore. Now it was loud, joyful, even festive. And at the heart of it all was purity. It began as a modest tradition, a yearly gathering to honor the town's heritage. But this year, banners stretched across buildings. Purity is unity. Unity is strength. The colors were brighter. The songs were sharper. Children marched in new uniforms, reciting pledges they had learned in school. I belong to the clean and loyal land. I see the world clearly, and I reject the impure. No one explained what impure meant. They didn't have to. People already knew who wasn't there. Those who shouted loudest were lifted highest. The man who turned in his brother for questioning the center, he was given a ribbon and a title, Model Citizen of Renewal. The girl who publicly cut ties with her confused parents applauded in the town square. Even friendships became tests. People began sharing messages like, "If you have nothing to hide, prove it." Silence is suspicion. Only the pure have nothing to fear. And so everyone performed. Marta, the baker, once known for her warmth, began sorting customers. Some were served with a smile. Others she quietly ignored. When someone asked about a man who no longer came to buy bread, she simply said, "He asked too many questions." Marta's business boomed. One day, a new symbol appeared on shop windows, a small white flame, painted neatly in the corner. It meant the shop was aligned. No one was forced to paint it, but those who didn't began losing customers, then friends, then peace. One old bookseller refused. By morning, his window had been smashed. No one saw who did it. No one investigated. His store stayed closed after that. People said nothing, but many repainted their own flames, bigger this time. Just to be sure. At town meetings, loyalty reflections were introduced. Each citizen was invited to share one affirmation of unity and one concern about impurity. Most people recycled lines from the center's pamphlets. But one night a man stumbled. His words were vague. He spoke of nuance, of balance, of understanding difference. There was no arrest. But he was not invited again. His wife stopped receiving calls. His son was reassigned to another school group. The man moved away 3 weeks later. No one spoke his name again. Eventually, purity became a competition. Neighbors eyed each other with subtle tension. Who had the cleanest flag? Who spoke the slogans first? Who showed the most devotion? One mother dyed her child's hair the official color. Another began reporting whispers she overheard in the market, even if they were harmless. The center sent thank you notes. No threats, no guns. Just praise. And silence for the rest. In the town square, a cleansing fire was held. People were invited to bring items of impurity, books, letters, foreign trinkets, or anything that might reflect the confusion of the past. The pile burned high. Some cried, some clapped, some just watched. Marta threw in a recipe book she had once loved, foreign dishes with spices from Harun's stall. "I never used it much anyway," she whispered, mostly to herself. When purity becomes the goal, humanity becomes the sacrifice. In a climate of fear, trust is the first to fall. And once trust dies, betrayal becomes survival. Lauren no longer needed watchers. The townspeople had become their own eyes, their own judges, their own jailers. It began with concern forms. The Center for Renewal introduced a quiet suggestion box in the town square. Report behaviors that may threaten our unity. The box filled up fast. At first, the reports were vague. I heard a neighbor listening to foreign music. Someone mentioned the past fondly. A child drew a flag with the wrong colors. No names were required, but names were given anyway. Soon the center's messengers began making visits, not arrests, just inquiries. People understood. One visit was enough to stain a name. Miss Elner had taught at the local school for 17 years. Beloved, respected, trusted. But one day, she read a poem to her students, an old verse about questioning power and walking your own path. One of the children mentioned it at dinner. The next week, Elna's class was reassigned. She was moved to curriculum review, a euphemism. No one told her why. She already knew. Her own students avoided her eyes in the street. In homes across Lauren, parents began choosing their words carefully. Children were told to repeat slogans before bed. Some were taught that true loyalty meant being brave enough to report even those you love. One boy, age 9, turned in his older brother for mocking a chant. He was praised in front of his school. His brother, gone the next morning. The parents didn't resist. They cried, but they whispered. At least they left the rest of us. Marta, the baker, received a visit from her cousin from another village. They drank tea and spoke of childhood. Just once, her cousin remarked, "It's gotten strange here, hasn't it?" Marta didn't respond, but later, unable to sleep, she filled out a concern form. Family member questioning the mood. The center did not reply, but a next flower delivery came early, with a thank you note. Marta cried when she read it, then burned the note, then opened the shop as usual. In the town square sat a man known as Otto. Quiet, always alone, always watching. Some said he had lost his family. Others said he had been corrected. No one knew. One day a teenager sat beside him. Nervous, he asked, "Did they take your wife?" Otto didn't answer, but the next day the teen was gone. People avoided the bench after that. And Otto. And questions. Siblings turned on siblings. Spouses reported each other. Best friends stopped meeting. The highest praise from the center now read, "You put unity above personal ties." One boy asked his mother, "Would you report me if I said something wrong?" She smiled too quickly. "Of course not, love." But that night, she stared at the concern form for a long time before putting it away. For now, a society that forgets cannot resist. When the past is erased, the future belongs to those who control the present. Lauren, once a town with photo albums, stories passed around tables, and dusty archives at the library, was now becoming something different, a place without memory. Not because time had passed, but because remembering was no longer safe. The town's modest library had long been a quiet refuge. Children once gathered for story hour. Elders read yellowed newspapers in the corners. Then one day, a new directive arrived. Outdated materials that contradict renewal values must be removed. Shelves were emptied. Books on foreign history, comparative culture, even old novels, gone. A sign was put up. Only books that nourish unity may remain. The librarian, Mr. Orlan, quietly locked away a few favorites in a chest beneath his desk. A week later, he was gone. The chest was never opened again. The center began publishing official chronicles, new textbooks and pamphlets about Lauren's history. Strangely, there were no longer any mentions of Harun's family. No notes about the old mayor's peace initiatives. No images of the festival where cultures once danced together. Instead, the past was rewritten to reflect one long, proud tradition of purity, resilience, and clarity. A woman who remembered otherwise tried to speak up at a town meeting. "That's not how it happened," she said. "I was there." The room went silent. The meeting ended early. The next day, her home was marked with a white smear on the door. She moved away before the week was over. A new building opened in the center of town. The Museum of Renewal. Inside, exhibits showed a simplified story. A time of confusion. A rise of corruption. A cleansing. A triumph of unity. A child stood before a photo of a man labeled enemy of harmony. He tugged his mother's sleeve. "But isn't that grandfather?" The mother's smile froze. "No, that's someone else." The child nodded, never asked again. Photo albums began disappearing from households. People no longer told family stories, too many dangerous names. Old diaries were burned, letters torn, keepsakes hidden. What wasn't destroyed was forgotten. Some resisted quietly, whispering songs to themselves, tracing names on fogged mirrors, but they knew the risk. For in Lauren, nostalgia had become suspicion. And remembering what had been, even silently, was a form of resistance. Marta found an old photo beneath a floorboard while cleaning. It was of her and Haran at a spring fair, laughing over a spilled tray of bread. For a long time, she stared at it. She almost smiled. Then she fed it to the fire and made herself forget. Control doesn't always come with chains. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in comfort. In Lauren, life had never seemed more orderly. The streets were spotless, the banners crisp, the people agreeable, even smiling. There were concerts now, carefully selected, celebratory in tone. Food was rationed, but evenly. Jobs were assigned with fairness. No one argued. No one protested. Because at last, things felt stable. But only because nothing real was left to disrupt it. The laughter was rehearsed. The songs all sounded the same. The festivals repeated like clockwork. Behind the painted smiles, no one truly knew anyone anymore. The lights seemed brighter, but the shadows were deeper. In every quiet corner, a flicker of truth still hides. Not all gave in. Some remembered, even if they pretended not to. A teenage girl kept an old book hidden in her bed frame, its spine cracked, but its stories alive. An old man whistled forbidden tunes when alone in the forest. A woman baked her grandmother's recipe once a year, just for herself. Small things, dangerous things. But they mattered. The resistance didn't wear symbols or carry flags. It existed in glances, in silence, in secret kindnesses. A note slipped into a pocket, a candle left burning by a closed shop. A single word scribbled under a bench. Remember. When a lie becomes too heavy to hold, it falls. But often, no one hears the crash. One day, the center stopped broadcasting. There was no announcement, no explanation, just silence. People waited for instructions that never came. Meetings were cancelled. The praise letters stopped. And slowly, so did the fear. No one rioted. No one cheered. The structure didn't explode. It sank. It turned out that when everything had been held together by fear and illusion, all it took for collapse was stillness. The end of control is not the same as the beginning of freedom. In the years that followed, Lauren did not immediately return to what it once was. There was no grand awakening, no parade of justice. People emerged carefully, as if stepping out into sunlight after years underground. There were conversations, apologies, long silences, tears for those gone, guilt for those still here. Martyr never baked again. Children asked hard questions. Some were answered, others still waited. A memorial was built, small, quiet, it simply read, "To those who vanished, and to those who forgot and finally remembered." The boil had ended, but the scars remained. And perhaps that was the first step toward healing. Lauren was never destroyed. It unraveled. No bombs fell, no fires burned, no invaders marched. It faded thread by thread, undone by fear, silence, and the belief that just one compromise wouldn't matter. But they did matter, each silence, each betrayal, each forgotten memory. What happened in Lauren wasn't extraordinary. It was ordinary. That's what makes it dangerous. Because it reminds us, the slow boil is happening somewhere, maybe everywhere, even now. The only question is, will we notice before the water begins to bubble?